Hi, everybody. Welcome to Tim's Vinyl Confessions. I'm Tim Derling, and we have another edition of the Kansas Deep Dive series. And this time, I've got a very special guest. I've got a special guest that has never been on any of the shows before on my channel. That will no doubt change in the future. You know him from Cretin Classics. You've seen him on The Contrarians. You've seen him on Grant's Rock Warehouse. You've seen him in the comments. He is a constant presence in our world, and we're the better for it. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Davey Cretin. Hello, sir.
Wow, thank you. That's a great intro. I'm almost speechless. I don't know what to say. Thanks for having me, Tim. It's great to be here.
And Davey's here because he really wanted to talk some Kansas. Specifically, he wanted to talk in the spirit of things. Ooh. And this is unique because actually Davey's going to be doing another one of these, and he's going to be the only co-host I've had doing the deep dive that's not actually in Let It Be Your Guide Kansas album review, because I didn't know Davey when I was putting this together.
Correct.
Probably could have shoehorned him into a chapter or two, but this is the next best thing, and it's really cool. I'm really glad that we're talking about this album in particular. This came out in 1988. It was the second of the Steve Morse albums. It was also the second of the MCA albums. And I have gone on record, and I'm going to preface this carefully. Hear me out, folks. This is actually my least favorite Kansas album. Now, I'm not saying I think it's a bad album. I'm saying mathematically, one of them has to come in on the bottom. This is also an album that I've listened to continually, and I keep trying to get into. I talk about that in the book. I think this is a very confusing album in a lot of ways, but not without merit. So we're going to get it started. We're going to go through track by track, but I do want to talk a little bit about this album. This album was produced by Bob Ezrin, who, some guy. Yeah, the legendary Bob Ezrin. It's a concept album, or at least it says it's a concept album. I'm of the opinion the concept kind of gets away from him. It's an interesting concept. It is to do with Neosho Falls, 1951, in that small Kansas town. The flood came with a warning. Within moments, all hopes and dreams were swept away forever. So it's based on, as far as I know, it's based on a true story, something that actually happened in a small Kansas town. This album was not commercially successful. It hit the delete bins probably within a year or less of it being out, which kind of is kind of a sad statement, because in a lot of ways it was their end of their major label recording career until much later when they ended up on Inside Out, which is distributed by Sony. But like I said, not without its merit. So we're going to start with the first song, which is kind of, if this wasn't a concept album or an attempt at a concept album, I would think Ghosts would be a very strange album opener. It's very slow, piano-led sort of ballad. Davey, what are your thoughts on Ghosts?
It is an odd way to open the album. It starts out as a stately ballad. It's very low-key. You hear wind or water as the album opens. It's very low in the mix. You have to turn up the volume to hear it. And then Walsh starts, or Greg Roberts, who's ever playing piano, starts with some piano chords. And there's a lot of Steve Walsh on this album on keyboards, which I like. That's one of the good things about this album. You hear his piano playing, you hear his organ playing on certain songs. But this is an odd way to start an album. It doesn't start the album with a bang like Left Overture with Carry On Wayward Son, just hits you in the face with a rocker. This starts out very mellow, but it is supposedly a concept album. And it's also very strange that Rich Williams came up with the idea after reading the book. I didn't write down the author's name, darn it. He read the story in a book about Kansas, and it was about the flood in 1951. And yet he has no writing credits on the album. And Rich Williams has had some writing credits in the past.
He's had a lot of writing credits.
Yeah, it's just unusual that it was his idea from reading the book, yet he's not involved in writing any of the songs, lyrically or musically.
That is very strange. And I mean, Richard Williams is the unsung, he's sort of like the Brad Whitford of Kansas. I mean, he's the unsung guitar hero. He's one of only two original members still in the band today, he and Phil Ehart. I'm actually looking, you've got me curious about this now, very curious. I'm looking on Wikipedia under Neosho Falls Great Flood of 1951 to see if I can see what the name of that book might be. And of course, when you're looking for something and you're live, you can't find it. But as soon as you were saying that, it dawned on me, this is the type of thing I probably should have bought and read before I did this. But might be something to pick up down the road, as sort of an extra, something from the Kansas, not universe, but an addendum or something. And yeah, you are absolutely right. It's a very quiet song when it comes in. This CD I bought in 1992, but when I bought it, it was in a markdown bin in its original long box. So this is a very, very quiet CD. Bought this one in Power at the same time. But very dramatic vocals from Steve Walsh.
Yes.
It's a melancholy song, but it's got a beautiful melody. It does grow on you, and it's all about the concept. I mean, there's no question that this song is directly about the concept. There's all sorts of I do want to show the inner sleeve off here. There's all sorts of like historical photos inside the sleeve here, and then there's the band.
Right.
Steve Walsh looking very 1988 there, and the rest of the band is not. Richard smoking a cigarette here, and anyway, but so next up, is a song that, go ahead.
I like Steve Morse's guitar solo. The song builds, the first song, Ghost, and it breaks into a really good Steve Morse guitar solo. I just wanted to add that. Sorry.
Yeah, Steve Morse is, I think Steve Morse might be a little underutilized on this album compared to Power. I'm a huge Power fan, huge, but this album is not without its charms. Now, one thing about this album that's notable is actually like 3 out of the 5 Kansas albums from the 80s, I think that this album commits a terrible sin and doesn't use their logo. However, what I do find interesting about the way that they have the name printed here is if you look here, you'll see that the second S is a small s with a line underneath of it, which actually means something, because the name Kansas comes from the Kansa Indian tribe. And further trivia note, do you know what the rough translation is of Kansas? The people of the South Wind.
I should have guessed that.
So anyway, so the cover too, this is it's a different looking cover for them. I talk in the book about how was this supposed to jump off store shelves in 1988. If it looks a little bit Hypnosis-ish, it's because this is a Storm Thorgerson cover. So Hypnosis was disbanded by this point, but of course Storm kept making album covers. Oddly enough, this is it's not about a storm, it's about a flood, it's about a disaster. However, next up is a song that I'm not really sure how it fits in the concept, One Big Sky. Now, this is a song that was brought in. It says it was written by H. Klinfeld and M. I'm going to look at the record itself, see if it actually gives me their first names.
I have the full names if you want me to say them. It's Howard Kleinfeld and Michael Dan Emig, I think it's pronounced. Okay. EHMIG, Emig. So they're using outside songwriters here.
Yeah. Now, it does. I will say this. They did give them a customized label, not just the regular Rainbow MCA label, but label. And it also says additional lyrics by Steve Walsh, Bob Ezrin, and Phil Ehart. Now, this is a song they actually did in concert from the album, because I have the King Biscuit Flower Hour concert they did from '89. Really good show, and they do this song. I don't know what this has to do with the concept, and there are certain production elements in this song that kind of date it.
Definitely.
What are your thoughts on One Big Sky?
It's a decent song. Maybe the only way it fits into the concept, or you could shoehorn it into the concept, is because if there was a flood, it was from the rain from the sky. So one big sky. That's my only thought on that. But the drum and percussion programming definitely dates this to the 80s. In fact, because this came out in 88, you could almost say this was after those production tropes from the 80s. So it's sort of like they're a little behind the curve on this song. It's an okay song. It's definitely not my favorite song from the record. There's some nice playing on it from Morse and Walsh, but without, Phil Ehart is such an underrated drummer, such an amazing drummer, and he's not even used on this song, or he's used with the percussion programming. It's just a little odd. It's not a great fit.
Yeah, it is. And I have to give Mike Ladano a shout out because he summed it up very well. The samples are extremely dated to the time. You have what I call kung fu swooshes and shattering glass. So typical for the time, those sounds must have been on every keyboard for sale in 1988 because, yeah, it's got those boop, 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 boop. It's distracting and it's horribly dated sounding. And it's Bob Ezrin. Like, Bob Ezrin should know his way around, but my understanding is it was not a good time for him.
Yes.
But let us move on from One Big Sky. Now things become a little bit more personal with this is a Morse and Walsh song, Inside of Me. And I've read through these lyrics, and there's nothing to do with a flood, an approaching flood, a flood that's already happened, a flood that's in the process of happening. I don't understand what this has to do with the concept at all.
The whole thing that it's a concept album, I wrote down it's a tenuous concept album at best.
Yeah, it gets away from him really quickly.
Definitely on this song. It's a personal, inward-looking song.
Yeah. It's very 80s. It's very kind of I don't know. It's almost, I use this term a lot, but it's almost soundtracky. I almost picture somebody working out, a montage, training montage. Inside of me, I can do this. I can get back to where I was. I don't know. So already, after one song, the concept is adrift, so to speak. And that doesn't change with the next song, One Man, One Heart. Now, this song's interesting. This is another song that was sent in by outside writers. Obviously, a lot of record company pressure from MCA. MCA, I think, dropped the ball on Power because what Kansas did with Power is give them, I've always said this, Power should have done for Kansas what 90125 did for Yes. They should have brought them back, and they should have brought them into the 80s, changing their sound just enough, and they could have gone 3-4 singles deep. It could have gone multi-platinum. Instead, it only did okay. It didn't certify. So now they're putting the pressure on. This song was written by a guy actually just passed away not too long ago, Mark Spiro, and also a name most people know, Dan Huff.
Oh, yeah.
Great guitar player. He was in Giant, but he's a session guy. He's a producer. He's a genius. But I don't think this is a very good song. Your thoughts? It's just
well, I love that first Giant record that Dan Huff did. That is a great record, which came out on A&M a year after this. I think it was 89.
89, yeah.
But this song, again, it has nothing to do with the concept. And it's one of those, it almost sounds soundtracky, as you said. I mean, Walsh turns in a good performance. This is right as his voice was starting to go, unfortunately. And I think the big culprit here is MCA. This came out when I was working at a record store, my first big record store job. It was my second job working at a record store. And I remember we had this album, and this was besides I had bought the Best of Kansas on vinyl a few years earlier. But this was the first full Kansas album I heard in real time in late 1988. This came out in October. I started working at a famous record store on Long Island, New York called Titus Oaks. And this was the album that I heard on CD in late 88. Came out about a month or so after I started there. And my boss used to play it. And I fell in love with the album at the time. I really loved it. I enjoyed it. I did a ranking on my channel of Kansas albums. So if you want to go to Cretin Classics, you can see where exactly this falls in my ranking. It's not at the bottom. It's not at the top. That's all I'm going to say. But we used to call the MCA, the record label, back in the day, we used to call it the Musical Cemetery of America, or the Music Cemetery of America, because there were a lot of rock bands like Jafria, Night Ranger, Triumph, especially Triumph in Kansas, who moved to MCA. And then the label forced outside writers. They wanted hit singles. They wanted big ballads. They wanted commercial stuff, and they pushed it a little. But if it didn't stick, then they just said, okay, this is a loss. We do well with our pop bands. We do well with our R&B acts. And that's the kind of label they were. So this album has 4 songs with outside writers, and I blame that on MCA.
Yeah. And none of them are all that good. You know, it's not like they got the very best of these songwriters. It almost seems like they got the rest of these songwriters, the songs that nobody else wanted. You are right in that this sounds soundtracky, but it sounds buried on side 2 soundtracky. This was not a single off of the soundtrack album. And there's no universe where it would be. And need I remind everybody, there's nothing in this about a flood.
Correct.
So we'll get to it a little bit later. Oh no, I'll mention it now because I think it's very relevant. Scott from the Prog Corner is in this book, and he's in this chapter, and he had an interesting idea of the songs that do fit the concept. They could have almost done what Rush did with 2112 and Hemispheres. Make the concept side 1 and make side 2 just unrelated songs. I know that wasn't hip in 1988, nor were concept albums. I mean, the big exception, of course, being Queensryche Operation Mindcrime, but that was more metallic. Odd side note, thanks to Jeff Wagner's excellent Fates Warning book, Destination Onward, highly recommended. Jeff wrote the foreword in this book. Jim Mateos, the guitarist from Fates Warning, actually got in contact with Kansas about writing for them around this time.
I didn't know that.
Now, that would have probably been quite a different story, but, you know, we'll never know. Yeah, this album went into the delete bins very, very quickly, and it's actually quite difficult to find a copy that doesn't have a hole punched in it or a chunk taken out of the side. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Night Ranger, I mean, Big Life went gold. It still ended up in the delete bins because it didn't go platinum. Man in Motion, probably my favorite Night Ranger album, didn't stand a chance. And like you said, they said, no, you need to, even though they'd already proven they can write their own hit singles, they said, do this Russ Ballard song. I Did It for Love. I think it's a fine song, but they can write their own hits. And guess what? It didn't work anyway. Yeah, MCA, not a strong rock label at all.
Precisely.
Yeah, not a strong rock label at all. But the only one that would have been worse would have been RCA, which is the Recording Cemetery of America. Yeah, not good rock labels. I mean, it's too bad that when Kansas reformed for Power, that somehow they couldn't have re-signed with CBS, because then they'd have had the power of that back catalog all being on the same label. And, you know, CBS would have pushed the new album, they'd have pushed the back catalog. And yeah, it was just kind of a mess. So now we get to one of my favorite songs on the album. It has absolutely nothing to do with the concept. Once again, I don't think House on Fire. Now, if your house is on fire, a flood might be just the right thing. As it stands, we've got a fantastic Steve Morse intro. I don't know what he's doing to make those sounds, but then the band kicks in and it's a rocker. It's an actual honest to goodness rocker. And it's who wrote this one? This one's written by Steve Morse, Steve Walsh, Bob Ezrin, and Phil Ehart. Great song. I think Steve Walsh may have ruined his voice on this song. And doing on those record, those James Brown type of howls.
Yeah,
but it's shrieks. A great song. I really like House on Fire.
I like his organ playing on this song.
Yeah, great. Yeah. And that's when you know it's Steve. He's really good at that. And over the years, he was more of the front man, but yeah, he's really great keyboard player. I mean, just listen to the
especially
old
on
stuff.
the organ. When he plays the organ, it's great.
Yeah.
And you hear it on this song and another song we'll get to later.
Yeah, big time. So next up is a ballad, and this closes off side one, if anybody's keeping track.
On the vinyl.
Once, on the vinyl and on the cassette, Once in a Lifetime. Now, maybe you've got the first name. It says A. Armato, D. Morgan, and A. Hammond.
I do have the names written out. It's Antonina Armato, Dennis Morgan, and Albert Hammond.
Albert Hammond. I recognize that name. Now, I am sure that MCA thought they had a hit with this, but to me, I think Steve Walsh's singing, if anything saves the song, it's his singing, but it's so predictable, and it could have literally been done by anyone. I don't see how this would have fit. This doesn't fit the concept. They didn't even put it out as single. So what's it doing here? I just think it all the momentum that was built up with House on Fire is gone, as is the concept. Concept is gone. We've had one song on side one that introduced the concept, and then it's like they forgot. I have to say, I have to think it's all of this record company pressure, shoehorning these songs in. And I think, I could be wrong, but I think this might have been the longest Kansas album to date.
It is.
And guess what? It's the CD age. They're trying to fill out the edges of the CD. They did not need these extra songs. So next up,
if I could just add that it's a catchy song. You could sing along with it. It should have been a hit on pop radio, but they didn't get the push from the record label.
This one really sounds like it should have been on a soundtrack as the love theme or something, but it doesn't, there's something about it that doesn't ring true. And I think it's the fact that it is an outside song. And also they're getting to one that's an original that I think is better for this type of song. So now the first song on side two, and the only single released, is Stand Beside Me. So this single cover just takes a fraction of the album cover. It's a band photo from the inside. And here is the Music Cemetery of America's more recognizable rainbow logo. House on Fire, by the way, is the B-side. I did not know this for many years because I never saw it until the advent of YouTube. I didn't know there was a video for this song. Now, the video looks like they spent a little bit of money, but Walsh is basically the only guy in it. He's got his hair tied back. It barely even looks like him. The rest of the band members are shown here and there. And the song, it's another outside song. Can blame a Canadian for part of this, namely Mark Jordan, who also wrote this with Bruce Gage, who is a constant co-writer for Richard Marx. And I think it was Pontus who said in this chapter something interesting about this song. I should have had this ready, but okay. So very much in the power ballad time frame. There was nothing about this song that would have stood out from the crowd. This could have been Richard Marx, John Farnham, Michael Bolton, or Eddie Money. What audience were they going for? Nothing prog about most of this album, but definitely not this song. And it's weird. I can say this about all of the outside songs on here, Davey. All of these songs sound like none of these writers' best work. They sound like the pile that was left that they just could not get rid of. That's what it sounds like to me. This one sounds like it's almost got a hook, and Steve sings it really well, but it doesn't go to places where it should. It doesn't have that soaring, hooky chorus that a song like this needs. It sounds nothing like Kansas. You've actually got, I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think that this song has, is it John Pierce?
Yes,
yeah,
fretless
John
bass.
Pierce on fretless bass. Doesn't sound anything like Kansas with that fretless bass on it. So,
but I like the fretless bass in this song, and he just passed away recently. So rest in peace, John.
Oh,
Pierce.
really? Oh, okay. I did not know that. So anyway, that was their, they were pinning all their hopes on that as a single. That's not the song to do it with, I don't think.
It's an anthemic song. It just didn't hit.
Yeah, I just don't think it just didn't quite have, I don't know. And competition was fierce for this type of music, so, and also I've had this theory for a long, long time that for bands like Kansas, and I will say bands like Foreigner and REO Speedwagon and Toto and 38 Special, Survivor, in 1988, it wasn't these types of bands' time anymore. Now, oddly enough, it was the bands who I think owe a great deal of debt to those bands for influencing them.
Yes.
But it was the bands like Bon Jovi and Def Leppard that were hitting at this point.
Yeah, the hair metal bands.
Yeah, who picked up a lot of cues from, these bands that came before. But it's cyclical. Music is cyclical, and this was the beginning of a downturn for Kansas, unfortunately. So even if they'd had a Dynamite song, like a Can't Miss song, I think it still would have missed. So next is, I think, the better of the two big ballads on this album. This one's actually written by Morrison Walsh. I Counted on Love. I like this one a lot better than Once in a Lifetime.
This is my favorite of the three in the middle of the album. And
I think that you can hear in Steve's vocals, he's more into this too. It's his own song. It's good. It could have been a single, but just wasn't bound to happen. So that takes us out. I think at this point we're completely out of the outside songwriter portion, and lo and behold, we're actually getting back into the concept, I think, a little bit. Another one of my favorite songs in this album, and I think this is the one you were talking about with Steve's organ, is The Preacher. Yes. So your thoughts on this one?
It's a rocking song. It's upbeat. It has some nice guitar playing from Walsh and Williams. And it's just, you hear the organ, you hear Walsh, good vocal, it's Kansas. And it's a preacher. Yes. It could be about the concept of what was going on in the town at the time. So it does bring back the concept a little.
There's something old-timey sounding about it. Yeah. I think this one fits into the concept. And, another thing that might have helped this album for the concept is that they could have, again, like 2112, there could have been little narrations written in the lyrics that might have been like, oh, okay, I see how this fits in. They didn't do that. They just kind of threw it out there and hope for the best, I think. But yeah, The Preacher's a great song. It's got the choir on it. They revived this song different times in recent years. They did it on Device Voice Drum, and I think they also do it on There's No Place Like Home. So this is one of the handful of songs from the Morris MCA era that sometimes gets a modern airing. Really good, really solid. Great drum fills from Phil, as usual. And then I think we're into the heart of the concept of the album with Rainmaker.
One of my favorite Kansas songs. I love Rainmaker. This is Prague, or Prague adjacent, if you want to call it that. And this has the concept of it.
It's all about the concept. But the thing is, I guess we assume that the actions of this man inadvertently caused the rain, which caused the flood.
That's the way I always took it.
But you have, I guess, at a certain point, you kind of got to use your head a little bit and think, okay, well, there's got to be something here that links this in. But it's a great song. You're right. It's extremely theatrical. Yes. Like Steve Walsh gets way into his character, and it's a joy to hear.
And the choir.
Yes. The choir's like quietly, pleading, almost. Yeah. And the midsection, Steve Morse, it's interesting. Steve Morse, some of his guitar parts in the midsection remind me very much of what he would end up doing in Deep Purple. So he has
the signature sound.
Yeah. It's a really cool song. Almost wouldn't sound out of place on in a play, like in a Broadway performance of some sort. Yeah, it's really interesting. Bob Ezrin, that just made me think. Bob Ezrin's track record with concept albums is interesting because for every wall, he's got an elder. He's got it in the spirit of things. And actually, the elder holds together better as a concept album.
It does.
Then again, I'm one of those idiots that likes that album. I know.
Oh, so do I. It's one of my favorite Kiss albums.
I'm an elder apologist. But anyway, I also wasn't around as a new fan when it came out, waiting for it, and I think that makes a big difference too. Speaking of Steve Morse, we get a little light relief with T.O. Witcher, nice little acoustic guitar piece. And Pontus in this chapter also said, I could have used a few more of those in between the songs. That also adds an old-fashioned, old-timey feel to the songs.
It's too short, and it's just an odd place to put it on the record between the last two proper songs.
Yeah.
It's an odd placement for it.
It should have been, they should have put it between like House on Fire and Once in a Lifetime, or One Man, One Heart Inside of Me. They could have put it in there so it at least remind you that, by the way, this is Kansas. They have acoustic guitars sometimes. But I think that All Is Forgiven by Bells of St. James. I think this is an epic song. It is, House on Fire and The Preacher are good. I think this song is fantastic. To me, this is the purest example of Kansas. This sounds like Kansas being Kansas. It's dramatic. Steve Walsh's vocals are amazingly good. The lyrics are poignant. They're not over the top. The chorus manages to be sort of sad and anthemic at the same time. It's actually got the bells in it, and it fits the concept. It fits the concept of a soldier being away while all these terrible things of all sorts are going on in his personal life and in the life of the town where he's from. Amazing. Your thoughts?
This is my favorite song on the record. This and, of course, Rainmaker. And these are the prog songs. This is the old school Kansas coming back, but it's almost like it's too little too late because it's just the end of the album that has this. And with what you said about the chorus, how it's anthemic and it's catchy, right before we started taping, right before I jumped on the Zoom, I was playing the end of this record and my girlfriend heard it. And once we stopped it to set up my iPad, stopped the music, she was singing along. And she said, now I can't get that song out of my head. It's very catchy.
And that's the thing. It's catchy too. It's very catchy.
Yeah.
And I got to tell you, it was a thrill for me. The one time I've seen Kansas in concert, I saw them in 1994. So it would have been the Freaks of Nature Live at the Whiskey lineup. Mm-hmm. And they actually did this song. I was not expecting to hear anything from either of the MCA albums, to the point where this first came on, I'm like, what is this? Then when that chorus came on, I was losing I was like, I had no idea they were going to do the song. And boy, did it sound good. And it was funny because, it would have been one of the newer songs in the set list at the time. So yeah, ends a very uneven album, but like I've said, I keep coming back to it because I keep hoping one of these times those songs that I'm kind of iffy about will just click in my head and I'll like them as much as the songs that I really like on here. But I don't think it's going to happen. I think it was a necessary step that they had to, something that they wanted to do. I think it could have gone better. It would not surprise me at all to find out that there's an alternate version of this in the vault somewhere with original songs that were specifically about the concept. And wouldn't everybody like to hear that album?
Yes,
that doesn't have all of those extra, bells and whistles and the outside songwriters. And the other thing too, imagine if nothing against Bob Ezrin, but imagine if it wasn't Bob Ezrin that produced this album, but it was Jeff Glicksman.
Someone who more Kansas-like.
And someone who knew the band and knew how they're supposed to sound. I don't know
what it was the 80s.
I don't know what he was doing at the time. I think, did he not produce The Eternal Idol for Black Sabbath? I think he produced that album.
That's sort of out of his wheelhouse, and this would have been more in his wheelhouse.
Yeah, but, sometimes the record label says there was a lot of, Bob Ezrin's producing, you got a hit. And they should have known by now that was not always the case. The elder. But anyway, so there you go, folks.
Could I just add a couple of things?
Absolutely.
This actually reached number 114 on the Billboard Top 200 charts in America. So it wasn't a big seller. It never, like you said, it never went gold. And they only officially released the one single, Stand Beside Me. Other than that, there was no promotion by MCA, the Music Cemetery of America. There was a big regime change at the label, and they just dropped Kansas and other artists at the time, like Night Ranger and Triumph. Just everyone got, all the rock bands got dropped, and they decided to focus on Tiffany and their other pop and R&B acts. That's where their bread was buttered, and that's where they were making the money.
Like a lot of country acts too were on MCA. Not a rock label. It might have been a rock label in the 70s with Leonard Skinner, but it wasn't a rock label
Steely
by
Dan.
the late 80s. And Steely Dan, but not by the late 80s. So it was but I think great things came out of it because they, this may have been a low point for them in a lot of ways, but they made some great music after that. And the stuff that's good on here is really good. And there's good performances on this album. It's just not up to that standard of greatness that they're capable of. But again, I can't help but wonder: is there an alternate version of this in some vault somewhere?
There may have been, but MCA also had the big fire where they lost all their master tapes. So if there was, we'll never see it now, sadly.
Unless it was in the possession of Phil Ehart or Steve Morse, or maybe somebody's got some, I don't know. And there, this is the type of album too. Why would there ever be a deluxe version? Because it wasn't a big seller. So it could have been great. And Kansas would end up doing a concept album. We'll be talking about it. And, that kind of sticks to the whole concept thing, or at least a little bit more than this. But there you go, folks. Are we wrong? Is any of you out there, is this your entry point to Kansas? Is it your favorite Kansas album? There are no wrong opinions, right? It's all subjective, and we love this band. So don't forget, let it be your guide, Kansas album review. Some great panelists on this album, available through Amazon, wherever your local Amazon is. Thank you very much, Davey. Thank you very much to Davey Cretin for Cretin Classics for sitting in with me on this Kansas deep dive. We'll be back. I think you'll be seeing Davey again. I'm pretty sure about that. So listen, folks, thanks for watching this edition of Tim's Vinyl Confessions. We'll see y'all later.